Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Welcome to Bermuda Boys.
Wow, Jack, that was a real skull crusher of an intro.
Oh, man. That was a good one.
I feel like I need a battle axe now.
Well, I never know what I'm going to get. You can thank Peepus Jones, my music coordinator over here, for giving me these wonderful intro songs that we have. But, that one might kind of fit the topic we have tonight.
I think so.
I think so. I think it'll fit. Sounds pretty good.
What is our
good
topic
job,
tonight, Jack?
We're going to talk about. It's a big topic.
Very big.
I had to put that joke out there. We're going to talk about giants, but giants in antiquity, I guess, and how they kind of feed in to our myths and cultures all around the world. Like pretty much every culture has some sort of story about a giant. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I actually do find fascinating about these stories of the giants is it does kind of tie into what we've been talking about before, with like the fire bringers and things like that. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. So a lot of mythology in and around the world has giants surviving the flood because they were tall enough to be above the floodwaters. Which I don't exactly know how that worked, but they were. And they were able to bring this ancient knowledge to the people that survived and restart civilization. So it kind of got me wondering and thinking like, I've always been fascinated with the whole like giants being found, like skeletons being found and stuff around the world, or just the mythology of giants in general. So I was thinking, hey, this can tie in, and we can do an episode on this. And here we are.
Yeah.
And here we are. And I'm Jack.
And I'm Mike.
And we're the fucking Bermuda Boys. So welcome to the show. I've just got our explicit banner up now, because I had to crack that F word in there. I don't know why. It felt like it had to be there. But hey, welcome to the show. If you're a first time listener, go back and listen to ones before this.
What are you doing here?
It's like, man, don't start 4 or 5 episodes. This is the 5th episode, isn't it? Holy crap!
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we took quite a break there, but it was the holiday season, so. We were both fairly busy. I was busy with work, and Mike was busy with work and family stuff. So, yeah. But we're back, and it's going to be great. We've got a very informational show for you guys tonight, as usual.
Yeah, Jack actually did quite extensive research. I was impressed reading your notes coming into this.
I was impressed as well, because as most of you all know, because if you're here, you've probably heard us on other shows. And if you haven't, well then, you don't have to. You don't have to go listen to those. But if you are here because of those other shows, then you know that I'm very bad at doing research. I would always do it like 10 minutes before the episode would start. And my research pretty much just consisted of pulling up a Wikipedia article or a Reddit page and just reading off of it and adding my own little spin to it. And I actually took some time this time to prepare something. So we'll see how that goes. This is the first for me. I feel like I'm back in high school and I'm preparing a speech for speech class, but I don't want it to be like that. And hopefully it doesn't come out like that. But I've got Mike here to bounce other things off of, and he's done some research of his own.
Yeah.
And we're gonna see where this takes us. So, giants.
Yeah. How do you want to do this? I was wondering, do we want to maybe go topic by topic? Maybe start with Nephilim?
Yeah, we could. Because Nephilim are probably one of the first instances of where giants are actually mentioned in, like, antiquarian text, being the Hebrew Bible. So, I guess it's not the Hebrew Bible. What is it? I forget. See, I'm already drawing a blank. See, I should have wrote this one down, but I didn't. The Hebrews. We'll just say that. And a lot of just kind of mystery about these Nephilim. I mean, they are mentioned in Genesis. Daniel so eloquently read Genesis chapter 6, verse 4 at the beginning of the show. And if you don't remember that for some reason, I can read it off again, except I didn't write it down. Damn it, where is it? Yeah, whatever. I'll just put Daniel in there again.
All right.
And excuse me, I got a lot of frogs in my throat today. Let's see. So the Nephilim were described as an offspring between angels and humans, as was mentioned in Genesis there, that angels had come down, fallen from heaven, I guess, and had sexual relations with human women, creating giant, strong men.
Men of renown.
Half men. Yeah, very, very renowned. Almost as giant and strong as Mike and I.
Yep.
But almost. Just a hair off. But, so, like, nowhere else in the Bible is this really mentioned. Is Nephilim really brought up ever again? But there is a lot of, like, mythology that goes on in other Middle Eastern religions and cultures that had sprung up around about the same time that kind of mentioned the same things. And a lot of people believe that the Nephilim survived the flood the same way as it is in any other culture. Because they attribute Goliath to being a Nephilim, but nowhere does it really describe him as a Nephilim, as he's described as a Philistine giant. But we don't really need to touch on, Goliath. Everybody knows about David and Goliath. And if you don't, well, where have you been? I mean, everybody's hell, there's a little TV show, like a claymation TV show with Davy and Goliath. Well, I don't know, Davy. But, that had nothing to do with any of this. But Goliath was described as, I believe, a Greek man who had somehow found his way into the Philistine army. Not exactly sure how that worked. I mean, he may have been forced to fight, or he was just mercenary or something. I don't know. But if everybody knows the story about David and Goliath, they did, and a lot of fights in antiquity, instead of just like pitting armies against each other, they would pit their best warriors.
A duel of champions. Yep.
Yeah, which honestly makes way more sense than the needless loss of life So it's something that we should really kind of look into doing today.
Actually, that connection with champion or heroes facing off and the Greek, that I had actually not thought about this before. Yeah, they did that in the Trojan War too. The champions would fight in front of the armies.
Yeah. And actually, Goliath ties into a story from the Iliad as well.
Really?
I can't remember it exactly right now, who it was.
Dude, you know what? Let's do an episode on this sometime in the future, because there's a ton there.
But there is a story that's pretty much almost identical to David and Goliath coming from the Iliad, which would have been a little bit later. Or, well, I guess it was written later, but it would have occurred around about the same time that David and Goliath did.
Probably.
Or whatnot. I can't. Yeah, we're gonna have to look that one up for later on. I vaguely remember it being in there. It's pretty much they described this guy as being a giant in stature. He carried an iron club, and I believe Goliath carried a bronze club and used pretty much the same Greek armor that this Greek guy did. But this guy was beaten by, I forget who. I believe it starts with an N or an L. I'd have to look it up. I'm really butchering this because I remember it vaguely, but I'm sure somebody out there is right now just like screaming at their phone or car radio or whatever that you guys are listening to. It's not just screaming like, Jack, what the fuck? Go back and read the Iliad. And it's like, okay, it's been probably 20 years since I read it. So you are correct. I do need to go back and read it.
But
that's
that's neither here nor there. It's not Nephilim.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. We can get back to that. We can talk about that Greek guy later.
Yeah.
We'll get back to the Nephilim. So, like, in the earliest translations of the Hebrew text, which eventually turned into the Bible, they described these Nephilim with the word gigantes, which I'm sure we can figure that out in modern day English. But they were described in Greek mythology. The gigantes, they were described as just being of great strength and aggression, but not necessarily of great size. So the Nephilim were revered as a very dangerous, aggressive people to be around. They were known for their fighting skill, their take no prisoners attitude. So they were people to not be messed with. So according to the word gigantes, it just means that they were just of great strength, not of great size. So it's kind of already putting the giant part of the Nephilim kind of down a little bit. And there are people out there that are just like, no, Nephilim, it said they were giants in the day. But as the translation of the Bible went through medieval times, up to the point of where it finally reached the King James Bible, it turned gigantes into just giant. So it says there were giants in those days instead of gigantes in those days. And now it's been translated again, and now it just says there were Nephilim in those days. Which, okay, what's a Nephilim? You don't explain it in the Bible anymore. It's just, oh, they were Nephilim, like we're supposed to fucking know. But they were also described in the Quran as well. Let's see, what's in my notes here? That there's a prophet who makes a strong reference to what could be a biblical Nephilim. According to this Islamic legend, the tallest of these Nephilim were about 100 feet in height.
Damn.
Which is that's massive. That's 30 meters. That's like, I'm trying to think of something of comparable size. Let's see, the average telephone pole is usually about 30 feet high.
They are 100 feet apart, so if he laid down, it would be the whole space between telephone poles.
That'll work. I was just trying to think of something like, that's like half a giant sequoia. So that's,
Yeah.
I mean, this is pretty hefty in height. And they were not wiped out by the flood because they were too tall to drown. So after they had survived the flood, God wiped them out anyway. They were still a constant threat to humanity. So God wiped them out or banished them into the lower layers of hell, which the lower layers of hell must have very large ceilings to be able to accommodate these guys. Otherwise, they're just crammed in there. I don't know. But, yeah, I mean, I don't really have a whole lot on Nephilim, and not many people do. There's a whole lot of speculation about what Nephilim are or what they were, but nobody really has any evidence that Nephilim even existed. I mean, obviously being a hybrid between an angel and a human, science kind of frowns upon that one because there's really no proof out there that angels exist, but we can prove that humans exist. But it goes back to the whole thing about, like, what would they consider a giant? Okay, so in the Islamic legend, they're saying that they're reaching heights of 30 meters. It's huge. But according to the Bible, when it comes down to, like, what they refer to as a giant, which is Goliath, we're going back to that again. They considered Goliath to be a giant, but they described him in ancient texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that as being somewhere in between either 4 cubits and a span, which is about 2 meters, or that's a little over 2 meters, I think. It's about 6'9" in proper terms. Just screw that metric bullshit because we don't know what that means.
This is Merca, goddammit.
Yeah, right. Or they could be as tall as 6 cubits in a span, which would be about 9 feet 9 inches. So if Goliath falls anywhere in between those two heights, that pales in comparison to how the Islamics legends, I said that wrong, portrayed these Nephilim. So there's a vast difference there. Somewhere in between 6'9" and 100 feet. Maybe they're just like regular people. They vary in height. I mean, we all vary in height from anywhere down from 3 and something feet to 8 feet, roughly. So, maybe they vary. We don't know.
Yeah. Well, I've got a little something that I think on Nephilim that I think might complement what you got pretty well. So your stuff there focused on Genesis, the Genesis 6:4, I believe it was, or 6:2 text that Daniel read for us. And
I think it's all about the first 4 or 5 verses of that chapter is kind of on it.
Yeah, and then you went into the Muslim texts and sources, which is cool because I didn't go there. But there is another text. It's typically considered apocryphal, which means rejected by the Catholic Church. But it's the text.
Oh, like me.
It's the text called the Book of Enoch. Now,
yes.
This book doesn't focus on the Nephilim, but it may give us a little more information on the players here. So the biblical text says that the sons of God went in unto the daughters of men, and they bear giants and men of old and men of renown and Nephilim, right? So the Book of Enoch gives us a little more detail on these sons of God. They were the Grigori in that text, which just means watchers. I'm not sure what language, but it wasn't Hebrew.
Right.
The Grigori are detailed out as these angels that were sent to earth by God to watch over humanity. Something probably akin to guardian angels.
Right.
And they were led by an archangel named Samael, or maybe just an angel. Not sure. Not clear on that.
Isn't Samael, isn't that Satan?
Well, he could be, because
Or am I thinking of a different name? Like,
I'm not sure. But this guy, Samael, he was a pretty bad guy, because what he and the followers that he had with him that were supposed to be tasked with watching over humanity did ultimately is to join and interact. Like, they were supposed to have kind of a, the Star Trek, like, prime directive to not interfere. They kind of had the same
Yeah.
kind of thing. They weren't supposed to interfere. They're just supposed to watch, just supposed to, caretake from behind the scenes. And they just jumped right in the fray, got to know all these people, got to know some human women a little too well, fell in love, married.
I mean, can
Well,
you blame them?
Each of these watchers, each of these Grigori, including Samael, they were embodiment, or maybe they were in charge of a certain type of angelic magic, like an angelic power or something. And what they did is they wound up starting to teach people these magic and esoteric powers, which was also, that was their prime sin, according to the Book of Enoch, is marrying human women. Now, they could have gotten away with it, but then teaching God's powers.
They had to take it that one step further.
Yep,
Yeah.
they just went over the line there, and they taught this angelic magic to humans, married human women, and then that brings us back around. Doesn't tell us much about the Nephilim, but maybe a little more about their fathers, I guess. There's another thing, a note on the Genesis text that I had. The translation of that, you talked about it some. There's some more details there that I found pretty interesting. Sons of God is Ben Elohim. The Ben El is the name that the people other than Israelites who lived in that area, who spoke the same language, that was the word they used for their pantheon. So kind of like Middle Eastern Olympians, I guess. So it's not if you take it in the context of the time, it's not saying angels of God came to daughters of men. It means the Olympians descended and married and gave something to women, gave these children to women. So Ben Elohim being the Canaanite pantheon, you have the daughters of men, and then the other translation note that I had, where is it? Nephilim itself. It often gets translated as giants or gigantes or gigantes, any of those things. But it actually comes from a Hebrew root word meaning heal or to heal. So they're either something that heals. The Nephilim are something that heals, like physicians maybe, or magic healer, I don't know. Or
angels.
Or they're, yeah, maybe. Or
be
they're
angelic.
something in need of healing. Now,
okay.
something in need of healing is usually ill or broken or sick in some way. So that leads me to the third etymology geeking out journey rabbit hole I went down. I geek out over etymology a lot, so get used to it.
I don't blame you.
So the other etymology thing is the word for like evil, sin, stuff like that, comes from a Hebrew word for decay, decomposition, or rot. Now we could look maybe at an alternate translation here using the words that were written in the original Hebrew to maybe mean that the gods descended from whatever the Canaanite version of Olympus is, visited human women and gave them something, gave them these children, and these children were rotten or decaying or in need of healing, or maybe they were healers. And then, of course, you get the translation of, okay, so angels came to human women. They had giants, and those giants were evil or sinful. And it really changes the narrative away from, the women had children from angels, and those children were giants, and they were evil, to more of the gods gave human women something, and that something was either healing or in need of healing. And
Or just a fancy way of describing a bastard child.
maybe.
I mean,
Now, there are other mentions of Nephilim in, I think it's Joshua. I'm pretty sure it's Joshua. Yeah, when the Israelites are doing their reconquista of the Holy Land and taking all these cities back from like wicked, corrupt civilizations and stuff. You've got some Nephilim that are mentioned. Og of Bashan, I believe, is one of them. You got...
yeah, I do think I saw something about this in a little bit of research that I'd done on the Nephilim.
Yeah.
I see you've done a whole lot more than I have, which is good.
Well,
Very good.
Yeah, so Og of Bashan, and then the other one I remember was Sons of Anak, or Anak, I don't know, Anak. Well, an interesting point on the Og of Bashan connection. If he is a Nephilim, Og of Bashan was known as a huge king. He was giant, and he had a giant table, and
Yeah.
the local area where Bashan, which is like somewhere in Jordan, I think on the eastern side of the Jordan River, I believe. That area, there are Neolithic burial giant standing stones. And there's this one that's more of a dolmen style. Dolmens have like pillars that come up, or a standing stone that comes up on either side with a big flat stone laying across it like a table. And it's called the table, or Og of Bashan's table. Now, that's an interesting connection, connecting the Nephilim to Neolithic times, Neolithic culture. And then if we do have, if I'm onto something with the perhaps them meaning like in need of healing because perhaps they're decomposing, maybe it means the decomposing body that is beneath that burial structure. And then that made me think of a connection in Scandinavia. Now, I know these are two different cultures, but it is a connection that came to my mind. In Scandinavia, people often brought offerings and venerated the being that lived within the soul of the dead body that was buried in one of these Stone Age or Bronze Age mounds or megalithic structures. They would leave offerings to like have good crops or things like that. And it made me wonder. I wonder if there was a local folk tradition where people from this Bashan region would bring offerings to the spirit of whoever was buried under this burial mound from thousands of years before them, in order to like pray for healing or something like that. And therefore we get around to our healers.
So it all just tie in.
Maybe, yeah.
Over time.
Yeah. Anyways, that was my notes on the etymology. Then, let's see. Little, I don't know where this fits in this framework, this pattern of thinking that I was using while researching these. So the sons of Anak and Og of Bashan and many other like Nephilim kings named of various cities that the Israelites reconquered as they were coming through the land of Israel or whatever. It made me think of, in Mesopotamia, when two cities would go to war, like, say, Uruk and Babylon, they would write the story that, like, Babylon's king represented his god, and therefore the god of Babylon, Marduk, would defeat whoever the god of Uruk or Ur or any of these other Shippar or whatever cities, and they would write it into the myth that Marduk actually defeated this other god in battle and was therefore superior to that god. Wonder if we had a similar thing where maybe Og of Bashan or these other Nephilim were perhaps either a deified king or the deity of that city-state, that walled town, and when the Israelites came through, they wrote into their own myth that the god of that city was defeated, and kind of like a final boss battle, in a video game. You fight through all the minions, and then you get to the biggest, scariest one, and so for their story, he was really tall and a giant and all of that.
Well, there's actually probably a good chance that he was a very large man in stature, because when you look at a lot of the kings of old, they tended to be successful warriors, not just necessarily a person that was born into nobility and riches. Like a lot of these, especially back in that day, were just more warlordy.
Yeah.
They started out with their own just little armies. And, if I'm going to join up with any sort of military might back in those days, I'm going to look at the leader of it. And if I'm going in there, and I mean, this guy could be the feistiest guy ever, but if he's 5'5", I'm not really going to rally behind him. You know what I mean? So if he's like 6'8" and 280 pounds of just solid muscle, I'm going to see this guy as a giant, even though I'm fairly tall in stature myself, but he's built, and I'm sure his his presence is seen as very giant, outlandish, and his ability to lead. So that's what kind of makes them think of them as gods as well. So their physical stature is going to be, it's probably not going to be ridiculously large compared to the average person. I mean, I guess it would be at the time, but it's also, it has to do with their personality, their ability to lead, and their ability to instill confidence into their army.
Yeah.
To be able to go and conquer.
Yeah, making the impression of physical might, making the impression of formidability is immediately recognized in height. You don't have to even talk to the person. You see that they're standing tall. I would actually argue even seeing a guy who's like 5'2", who's a leader, but he's standing tall versus hunching over like my dumbass does all the time.
Like me.
Yeah. A person who's
I don't have confidence, though.
Standing tall, chest out, that projects confidence. You don't even have to ask the guy. You can just tell, like, this is a guy who knows who he is. He knows what needs to be done, and he gets it done. This is someone I would follow. So being physically impressive as far as, like, height-wise, like if you're 6'8", or like Goliath 9 foot whatever, like that's going to just even add to that,
Yeah. And I'm sure a lot had been embellished also. I mean, you got to think, for one, you probably had a whole lot of propaganda back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
So you had your, like you had mentioned before, with the little city states, and just kind of warring with each other all the time. Well, they're also going to be throwing out that propaganda as well. Like, our God King is bigger than your God King.
Oh,
These are his achievements, and he's huge, strong as an ox.
Yep.
We've seen him kill 30 people with one swing of his sword, stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not possible, but the people at the time, they believed it.
Oh, yeah. And, that's not conjecture on your part. That's actually borne out in inscriptions by warriors and generals and kings from back then. Like, I am the king who, with one hand, first thing in the morning, I defeated 7 city-states, and it wasn't even a big problem. And yeah, but this crazy, like, what is it that called? Embellishment, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And it leads to stories like in ancient Greek, like stories of like Heracles and Hercules, these big, burly, strong men, but they had powers of the gods. You know, they could wrestle elephants, lions, and, and then, like Samson in the Bible, using a donkey's jawbone as a sword and, wrestling lions as well with his bare hands to death.
Yeah.
And Samson was seen as not necessarily as being a giant, but as just by being a strong man in general with these supernatural God-given powers.
Yeah.
And a lot of cultures would have that. And if you are the king of one of these city states and you really want to instill some sort of fear into the next place that you're going to try and conquer, and you want to provide your army with the confidence that they're going to be able to do it, well, then you're going to make up the best and awesomest stories about yourself that you possibly can.
Yeah.
And I'm sure their physical stature kind of helps with that as well.
Yeah. A lot of the first defense, a lot of people, these are city-states. They're walled city-states back then in the Middle East and Mesopotamia and Israel and that sort of thing. But a lot of people think of their wall as their first line of defense. No, it's the stories of their champions, their myths of their gods. That's their first thing. Like, I'm not going to go mess with this city-state if I'm not even going to go try. If I think that their king is blessed by his God and his God is the most powerful and this king is the biggest and tallest motherfucker out there,
Yeah. Just like, look what he has done.
Yeah. I mean, another thing to think about is these guys technically a king of a Bronze Age city-state would have actually been pretty impressive. Your cities back then did not get much bigger than about 10,000 people. So if I was in charge, let's say I became the mayor of my town. My town is about 35,000 people. I'd be a bigger guy than the king of, say, Babylon in 2000 BC. But there's something bigger.
Comparison you got there. I like this.
But the thing is, for my world, there's something bigger. There's a president of the whole United States. There's leaders at the UN. There's bigger things out there. So I'd be rather kind of a petty, just being a mayor of my city. But back then, there's nothing bigger than these cities that are 10,000 people in population. Yeah. So if you've managed to claw your way to the top of one of these and managed to keep that, as far as like having your dynasty rule over that for a while, or as far as defending against invasions from other city-states, or hell, even just managing the grain and food and water needs for that city, that's pretty fucking impressive compared to like just being in a little village of about 50 to 100 people, which is the average village of that time, So
I get what you're saying. I mean, it was a colossal effort for somebody to be able to take that on, and I use the word colossal there on purpose. Thank you.
Yeah.
But it was at a time when people were just beginning to settle down, form cities, and we as people, and pretty much just like any other predatory animal on the planet, it's all about dominance. So you want to be the dominant person in your territory, and you want your territory to be as large as it possibly can be.
Mm-hmm. The most resources you can get. Yeah.
So, and one way to do that is it's the same way that it's done in the animal kingdom too. A lot of animals don't actually go on and actually physically fight. I mean, some do, but a lot don't. It's all about just posturing and showing off your goods and being like this, hey, look at me. I'm stronger than you, I'm bigger than you, fluffing up. And that's essentially what they would do to each other too. Is like, okay, we're spreading our story of our giant man to this place, and we're just going to let that kind of just filter on through from every little person in that town until it reaches their giant man. And he's like, whoa, okay, this guy sounds like he's really got it going on. And I don't want to fuck with that.
Yeah.
So then they don't. And then they do end up avoiding a whole lot of bloodshed as long as they're accepted into that culture instead of just being slaughtered when they do show up.
Yeah.
But then it goes back to the whole, once again, back to David and Goliath, with how they would just pit their warriors together. So you got your biggest, baddest dude, and then this army's got their, well, in David's case, average-sized dude with a slingshot.
I know,
But,
at 12 or 14 years old or whatever.
And they would pit them together for a battle to the death to save their farmers and their just regular lay people from having to fight, so that, the people that were actually worth something to the city-state. And your big giant dude, yeah, he was worth something because he was protecting the lives of all the people that lived in there.
Yeah.
But he was replaceable. The farmers, the constructors, the people that actually did all the civil engineering and kept the city up were the people that they would send out to fight, but they didn't want them to fight. You don't want to lose them. They're a huge asset.
Yep.
So you'd pit these two people together, one or the other wins, a war over.
Yeah.
Until next time.
And that's actually a remarkable innovation, I think. I'm not aware of that in the animal kingdom. If you think about, like, ants and termites, or fucking 2 colonies of ants, for that matter, they go up and they just go on full-scale warfare, like thousands of casualties. And you'll see that on your sidewalk when you're walking around. Just like, I'm like, dude, okay, like, World War II ain't got nothing on a single little red ants versus black ants war that I have out my front sidewalk last summer. Because, like, the dead ants that filled the sidewalk after it was all over was insane. But, being able to go, like, okay, let's set that whole, like, inevitable outcome of, like, thousands of casualties, and let's just do the 2 guys, and whoever wins, and then we go home and we go back to what we were doing, and nobody's the worse for wear.
Unfortunately, with how modern warfare works, I mean, for World War II, for example, it's not like we could have just been like, okay, Hitler, I'm sorry, we're sending our leader over there. We're sending over our paraplegic FDR to kick your ass. We would all be speaking German now. I mean, we'd gotten our asses handed to us. So yeah, back in those days, you needed a leader that was big, burly, prone to arms, knows how to fight, was born in it. Look at the Spartans, trained in fighting and tactics from an early age. You had to have a leader that was the same way. He couldn't just be somebody that was like, you know what, elect me because of this. No, you had to have the physical stature. Yeah. You had to be impressive to be able to get these people to follow you into battle.
Yeah.
So I think personally that's where a whole lot of the giant stories come from in the Middle Eastern cultures. So like Nephilim, they may not exist, but I'm going to lean towards that they were just described as being strong and aggressive instead of just being giant. They were giant in their might, not in their size.
Okay.
So, and that kind of brings me to what would be our next kind of.
Wait, hold on.
You got more.
I've got
all right.
one last little kind of deep dive I did into Nephilim, and then I'll wrap up. I just got 3 points, I promise.
No, that's fine. We got all the time in the world, really. I don't care how long these shows go on for.
Alrighty.
I could talk about this shit for hours.
So I got to talking about this getting bouncing some ideas off my wife, and we kind of came on something I had never thought of before. So here is an alternate hypothesis for the Nephilim. So the Ben Elohim, right, the Olympians, the pantheon of the gods, came down. They give something to women, human women, and then they, give birth to whatever it is. It could be an idea. It wouldn't necessarily have to be actual children, being as gods don't actually exist, so to speak. So it could be some sort of divine idea or inspiration that the women ruminate on and take apart, reassemble, make into something new, different. And then the Nephilim are born, right? Something that either needs healed or can heal, or potentially both. Like an axe could be used to build a cabin or to chop down a tree. Could do both, depending on how you use it. So
chop a leg off,
or chop a leg off. So Nephilim could be kings devoted to a mother goddess religion who have fallen into Oedipal tendencies. Simple way of explaining that would be like they're kings who are quote unquote big babies, too dependent on their quote unquote mommy, or the mother goddess,
Sigmund Freud would love these guys.
Yeah, and then they're written about by the Hebrews, right? Well, the Hebrews are devotees of Yahweh Elohim, a father god. Yeah. So from the perspective of people who follow a father deity, it would be like, wait, what, you need your mommy? You got to cry to your mommy? There's beauty in being able to go to your mom and say, like, I'm feeling bad, and she cooks you some yummy soup and comforts you and sends you back into battle. But if you fall into that attitude permanently, and you have to depend on your mommy all the time, you're kind of just turning into a big baby. At least from the perspective of these father god worshiping people, the mother goddess culture would have looked just like it needed healing to them. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then another possibility, though, could have been some sort of like healing tradition or some sort of religious tradition or ceremony that has to do with healing that centers around a mother goddess, but symbolized by the Hebrews as giants. Like they had to overcome this idea in the cultural substrate that they had conquered, which was running off to mother goddess worship. And so they conceptualized that in myth as giants. But it would just be a ritual or a method that was ill understood by them, being devotees of a patriarchal father god. But yeah, a goddess healing tradition might look pretty strange and be hard to describe in that situation. That would be my alternate hypothesis that me and my wife kind of dove into.
And that makes sense. Makes very good sense. And it actually does bring up something that I did actually look up earlier. And it's something, it's a story I'm sure everybody's heard. But there was this, what was his name? Antaeus, the half giant son of Poseidon and Gaia. And Gaia being Earth, the mother god of Earth. And he lived in the interior desert area of what is now known as Libya. And anybody that would come past his little area, he would challenge them to a wrestling match, which was always to the death. He would kill everybody that would walk past him, and he was a giant guy, who was described as a big guy, and he was just, it sounded like kind of a dick too, but whatever. So what he would do is everybody that would pass by, he'd end up challenging them to a wrestling match, and they're just like, if you win, hey, you win. If you die, now you're mine. So he would take all the skulls of everybody that he killed, and he built up a temple to his father Poseidon. And the reason why he was able to beat everybody that came across him is because as long as he could keep his feet on the ground, in contact with his mother, Gaia, who was obviously, the earth god. As long as he was always in contact with his mother, he was invincible. he couldn't be killed. But then Heracles came along, the Greek hero Heracles, and he was challenged by Antaeus, and they fought and scrapped for a good amount of time. And Heracles, being a much more intelligent man than he was a fighter, he was a good fighter, but he was so much smarter. He realized that if he could get Antaeus off the ground, he could kick his ass. Because if he broke that contact between Antaeus and his mother Gaia, he could beat him. So he picked him up, like off the ground, and just like crushed him with this, I guess what would be described as a bear hug.
Nice.
And was able to then pass and move on through that area. So,
hey, that's
it kind of ties in with that, the mother god type thing. Yeah.
That's really cool. I only just noticed something about that, actually. So, yeah, that is I never thought about the inclusion of like mother goddess, contact with the mother goddess being strengthening before. I thought that was just a silly part of the story. So, Hercules or Heracles technically
means... Well, it's like, go out and touch grass, It's,
yeah. So
it's strengthening.
So Heracles actually means one who is protected by Hera, the Greek mother goddess. And
oh, yeah, that's true.
His original name is Alcides or Alcaides, something like that. Yeah, that could be one, I noticed the similarity to it's like that myth is like a microcosm of the macrocosm, Atlas holding Ouranos off of Gaia to prevent her from having more children. And then but I also see like maybe it could be the supremacy of Hera as the new mother goddess over Gaia as the mother goddess via their champions, Heracles.
That's
and
very possible. Another one of those just propaganda style stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that were so prevalent at the time. I mean, my God's better than your God.
Yeah.
I mean, we as human beings, tribalism it's in our heart. I mean, just look into like politics of the United States these days. It's still there. Look it down to like
if you want to keep your sanity, don't look into politics in the United States.
No, I'll use a different example. Look at your local high school in your town, and look at your neighboring town's local high school, and then look at them both together when they're playing football in the fall. That'll show rivalry. You tribalism right there.
You even got a mascot out there. What is that but the attempt to embody the spirit of your school upon the field, right?
Yeah. And essentially what football is a small battle on a pitch that is fought by a team of men on either side until one of them wins. And we get behind them. We root for them, we back them, but the other team, no, they suck. We hate them. But you see a kid from another team on the street, you're like, hey, you played a good game the other day. Our tribalism has gotten a little less. It's not like you see this opposing team's kid out there and you just end up beating the shit out of him in the grocery store parking lot one town over because you hate his guts because you don't like the town next door.
Yeah.
It's gotten better, I would say. But it all comes down to that. We as human beings, we need something to be behind. So we're always going to be picking a leader, picking our tribes. And it comes down to our where we're located in nature and how we're nurtured. So it comes down to the whole mother goddess thing still there too. It's like, oh, well, yeah. So your town is where your mom lives. You're going to protect that place because your mom lives there.
Yeah.
Your dad, he died 20 years ago, like around about the time you were born, because he was a champion that got murdered in a battle. So you never really got to meet your dad. But your mom was always there. She raised you and everything, but still made you the strong man that you are today. In most cases, not necessarily in ours, but I'm talking about more ancient times.
They even have rituals where the king ritually marries the land that he is in charge of, as though the land is a woman.
Yeah. And the earth has always been seen as a woman. I mean, hell, Mother Nature, we still call it that.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been a feminine construct in the human mind. So, yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. What was I was going to move on to something before, but then you had more on that, and I lost my segue now.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It was you brought up some really cool stuff, but where was I? No, we're not talking about Goliath. Oh yeah, well, okay. So we've covered one explanation so far about where these giant myths could have come from, but there's an actual like physical cause for where these myths could come from as well. And they would find bones. The ancient Greeks found bones of what they considered to be giants, because they were, huge, had these huge skulls, these giant femurs, and just huge, dense bones. And what they were finding was essentially either fossilized bones of, like, I don't know, dinosaurs or something, or most likely mastodons and mammoths.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually been attributed to the Cyclops of Greek lore as being somebody found a mastodon skeleton and looked at that giant hole in the middle of the skull
where
the trunk comes out.
Yeah.
And associated that with, well, that must be where the eye socket was, and the ears were on the side where the eyes were.
Yeah.
So they just assumed that, okay, instead of that being eyes, those must have been the ears.
Mm-hmm.
And so this big giant hole where the trunk was the eye, so that they only had one.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at an elephant skull and you look at a picture of how like a cyclops was actually described, how they, structured it up, and it's like, it's right there.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1613 in France, there were these, I guess it's just referred to as Masons. And I'm just going to read what this guy wrote. In 1869, a W.A. Seaver wrote about this event. And he said, in times more modern, which would have been 1613, so that was apparently modern to him. Not really modern to us, but I don't see why it would have been modern to him at that time either. It was like 250 years prior, but whatever. He said some masons were digging near the ruins of a castle in Dauphine, in a field which by tradition had long been called the Giant's Field. At a depth of 18 feet, they discovered a brick tomb, 30 feet long, 12 feet wide, and 8 feet high, in which was a gray stone with the words, I don't know how to read this, but I think it says Theodobacchus Rex cut on the stone. Rex meaning what?
King.
Terrible? King? King. That's it. I was thinking Tyrannosaurus. That's terrible. Yeah, terrible lizard king. Anyway, okay. And when they opened the tomb, they found a human skeleton in its entirety, 30.5 feet long, 10 feet wide across the shoulders, and 5 feet deep from the breast to the back. His teeth were about the size of an ox's foot, and his shin bone measured 4 feet in length. So if you think about the size of this, how they describe it and everything, all right, just picture that in your head. So what they thought they found was the remains of Teuton-Bacchus, which was a legendary Germanic king of around about the time of the Romans. And the Romans and the Teutons, they fought a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And they described this Germanic man, Teuton as being a giant of a man. But compared to a Roman, I mean, this guy could have been my size. He could have been like 6'5". The average Roman would have been like, what, 5'7"?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe less.
Yeah. So he would have been seen as huge
Mm-hmm.
to them. And the German people would have also been seen as being incredibly large because most of them, well, they were.
Mm-hmm.
So, and as time went on, from these Roman times of them telling stories about these Teutons, that it just kind of, over the thousands of years, or 1,000 years, I guess, after the fall of the Roman Empire up until the mid 1600s, like an entirely too long of a game of telephone.
Mm-hmm.
All these facts got conflated and just thrown out of proportion, just like this guy did. So he was monstrous. So they thought they found the tomb of him because that's what it said on the stone was Tuto Bacchus Rex. But what they didn't really factor in at that time was that there was a man who came from North Africa. I think we all know who he was. He took his elephant-led army
Hannibal Barca.
up through Spain, across and over, through France, over the Alps, and raided the shit out of Rome. Because they didn't see him coming. They didn't think he was going to make it, but he did. And he pushed those elephants through some shit that they should have never seen. Mm-hmm. And you can pretty much guarantee that an elephant was going to die at some point along that trip.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a good chance that one of them passed away in France. So what better name for an elephant than to name him after a gigantic German who was adept at killing Romans? And Hannibal obviously hated Romans as well. So why not name your elephant after that? And when he passes away, being such a revered animal in Hannibal's army, of course they're going to give it a tomb. So they did. And the way this thing is described screams elephant. So it actually did turn out that this giant was an elephant. They figured it out later on. But the people that discovered it had no clue. They thought they were looking at the bones of a giant.
Yeah.
But it was just one of Hannibal's elephants.
Yeah.
Possibly,
yeah.
most likely. You know, so...
Well, and you're not seeing, like, the trunk, obviously. You're just seeing the bones that are left, you know. Yeah, yeah. And hell, there might have, if it was a war elephant, it might have even had trappings, like, you know, like armor and you know, harnesses and stuff like that, which would make the bones look like they've got these little metal clasps and whatnot that are on clothes. Yeah.
And elephant bones are extremely dense, and the same thing with mastodon bones and whatnot. They're extremely dense because they're meant to carry great amounts of weight and bulk.
Yeah.
You know, elephants are huge. They're heavy. So their leg bones are going to be extremely dense and strong. Because the last thing an elephant wants to do is break a leg. It's not going to survive. It's like a horse. It's like impossible to survive and find food and everything after that. So very dense bones. And, yeah. You got the whole skull looking like a person. And the thing about elephants also is like I can see why they would get a little bit confused, because if you'd never seen an elephant skeleton before, you see their legs, and when you see an elephant in real life, it just looks like their leg is a stump. It just ends at a point and it's got a few toenails on it, you know?
Yeah.
But their actual bones, they still have toe bones that are very long.
Oh.
And very kind of hand-looking.
Oh,
like a human
cool.
hand. It would be just like a giant human hand. It's
Yeah.
the same thing with a horse as well. They still have toes. They have one hoof, but all their little toes go into it. So it's like kind of weird looking. All hooved animals. All it is just a gigantic fingernail, pretty much. So that kind of like just finding these random, say, mastodon bones, you can attribute it to mean like it's either a cyclops because you don't know what you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to make up myth about it.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to attribute it to being a giant. So there is an actual physical explanation as to why a lot of these ancient cultures have stories about giants. I mean, you're digging out in your field, plowing out there, getting ready to throw down some seed. Then you come across this mastodon skeleton that's been buried there for 30,000 years. Well, shit. That looks like a damn giant. And they're found all over the place.
Yeah.
They're still finding them in Michigan. I think they just found one a couple of years ago in some dude's backyard.
Huh.
Like a full, complete mastodon skeleton. It's like, huh.
Yeah. Nice. There's also, so that link with Cyclops is interesting because there's also a human cyclopism. Usually the infant dies shortly after childbirth because of some sort of, I don't know, like both their eyes developing into one central big eye seems to damage their brain or something.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
Makes sense. I mean, the skull structure.
Mm-hmm.
Man, say that 10 times fast. Skull structure.
But
Structure.
If you're aware of children being born with that in your society in ancient Greece or whatever, and then you find a skull with just one big eye in the middle, I mean, it seem to follow like, oh, hey, this is that thing.
This is that little baby that died. This is like his cousin. He grew up,
Yeah,
and,
or what he came, his ancestors were, or some, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. But the way they describe this thing, I mean, like, oh yeah, we found this tomb with this giant in it.
Mm-hmm.
But they described the measurements and everything as exactly like an elephant.
Yeah.
But they thought, like, no, this is a person.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, like I said, if you don't know what you're looking at, you're just going to make it up. You're going to guess.
Yeah.
So what's the most basic thing you can come up with? Well, it's got to be a human.
Yeah. Well, how many Frenchmen in the Middle Ages or 16 whatever had seen an elephant? Even if they'd seen an elephant, how many had seen an elephant skeleton?
Yeah, right. Like the last time an elephant had been through France by that point was when Hannibal brought them through.
It was that dude they were digging up.
and most people were uneducated at that point anyway. Would have never even known who Hannibal was. Mm-hmm. So, like, what some dude did 1,000 years before didn't matter to these people that were just living a virtual basic subsistence. Mm-hmm. They didn't care. Yeah. It was just like, no, but that's what it is. It's a giant person.
Yeah.
It's got to be. So I think a lot of gigantism and giants in mythology and giants in general can be passed off as that. And there are many stories from cultures all around the world of giants. I mean, we've got one in Australia, a guy known as Tharded Jimbo, who was an Australian Aboriginal myth. And it said that he stood 7 foot high and was just a big, bulky guy. Lived out in, I guess, the outback, as it would be called now, and was a cannibal. And a lot of giants are actually associated with being cannibals as well. The same thing with the Cyclops, too. So it's like, these were things to be feared. You didn't want to go around them. They eat you. So I don't know exactly where that whole aspect of this mythology comes from, but it's also just like, avoid that area, a giant lives there. Mm-hmm. He will eat you. That's probably just like a bear or something living in the cave. They didn't want to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Same thing with like dragons and whatnot. You go over there, that dragon's going to get you. That's probably like a mountain lion lives in there, and it's just like, rawr. I don't know. The people die, people go over there, don't come back. So it's like, I don't want my kids going over there because they're going to go over there and not come back too. So we're going to make up a story about it. So there's a giant cannibal over there that's going to eat you if you go over there. Mm-hmm. So there's that guy. I mean, they ended up trapping him in a cave at one point after he ate someone, their family members. He ate this dude and then went back to his house to marry his wives.
Oh.
And his wives were not very happy that they, murdered his husband and their husband and ate him. So they ended up forcing him into a cave, throwing a whole bunch of sticks and burnable material in the front of the cave and lit it on fire. He couldn't breathe in there. It filled up with smoke, so he tried to run out and ended up falling into the fire and dying. But he was only described as 7 foot tall. But the Aboriginal people, that's pretty big.
Yeah, yeah.
So in Chinese mythology as well, I'm probably going to butcher the name of this one because I don't speak Chinese even remotely. But there's I guess a mythological figure named Fang Fang. That's what I'm going with. It's Fang Fang? Fang. I don't know. It's spelled Fangfeng. So I don't know. Fang, I don't know. But I'll just call him Fang Fang because it's funner. So he was, I guess he was known for arriving late to an assembly called forth by you after the end of a great flood. And I guess because he was late, that was deemed a reason to be executed. I missed probably a good chunk of the story because I just kind of quickly threw this one in there. But when he was executed, because he was described as being a giant of nearly 33 feet tall, the executioner had to build a large dike in order to reach his head to be able to strike the killing blow to him. I can only imagine the size of the axe and everything, but, whatever. But the reason why Fang Fang was late for that assembly was because at the end of the flood, he was saving people. He was big enough to be able to just, carry them through the floodwaters. Being 33 feet tall.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people believed he was wrongfully executed, and he's revered as a god now because of that. But he was described as being a giant with one eye and the brow of a head of a dragon and the ears of an ox. So once again, we have something that's very descriptive of what could be a mastodon skeleton or an elephant skeleton. And it ties in with the Cyclops of ancient Greece, this Teuton dude that they found out there in France, which turned out to be an elephant. So, And then, we had Antaeus of the Greek. Well, I've already gone over him. But it kind of moves me along to the very much more recent ones. And there's a lot of Native American lore about giants, specifically out in the Nevada area. There's a lot of lore about a race of giants that had red hair. They were described as being much taller and stronger than ordinary men. And they were described in legend as being both brave and barbaric. And they could cause cruelty and just horrific things to people around them. And they were also described as cannibals as well. So, and if we know anything about Native American culture, we know they were definitely not redheads.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. And if we know anything about where redheads come from, we know that they're definitely not giants. So the fact that they're describing these giants as having red hair is very interesting. Where would a Native American culture, without contact for Europeans, come up with a story about red-headed people if they didn't exist? And they would describe these, they were called by the Paiute? Paiute? I don't know. Probably pronouncing that horribly wrong. They called these red-haired giants the Sitka. And legend has it that they came from a distant island by crossing the ocean on rafts that they had built. And in South America, the Incan civilization, or the Peruvian civilization of that time, also had a description of giants that had red hair that had also come from across the ocean on rafts they'd made out of reeds and things like that. So both of these Native American cultures, a North American culture and a South American culture, both had pretty much the same story, thousands of miles apart, almost identical, even down to the red hair. So kind of led some credence to what I'm about to say. So in the Lovelock Caves in Nevada, back in, I don't know when it was like early 1900s, they found in that cave a skeleton, actually two giant skeletons. And they didn't find them in the cave. They found them buried in a lake bed near the cave. And they measured between 8.5 to 10 feet in length, these skeletons. And they were mummified like how the ancient Egyptians mummified, wrapped in just like a mummy would be. And they had long red hair. But, you know, we can't find the mummies anymore. They disappeared. We don't know what happened to them. Absolutely no proof whatsoever of this. So, you know, kind of
Is this
attributed
that
it off to being a hoax.
Is this that story of the Smithsonian? They sold it to the Smithsonian and the Smithsonian lost it?
No, that's a good one though. That's not this one. That actually happened in San Diego. Now they found this mummy in the San Diego area. I think I might have this one.
It wasn't a
listed on
giant.
here.
It wasn't a giant though, was it?
I think it was.
Oh yeah.
If I can find it. Yeah, let's see. Okay, so there was a giant mummy found in San Diego that was measured to be a height of 8 foot 4 inches back in 1895. So the Smithsonian bought this mummy for a very, very large sum of $500 at that time. So the Smithsonian was invested in this thing and figuring out what it was. And shortly after getting it, the Smithsonian declared that it was made out of latex rubber. And they just, they pitched it. They're like, nope, it's a hoax. They threw it away. That's after paying $500 for it. Now, if
Money
you know
well
anything
spent.
about latex rubber or a regular decaying human body, you can tell the difference between either one. So the people that went and purchased this for the Smithsonian, I'm sure they knew the difference. So why would you go out there and pay these people $500 for this gigantic mummy and then declare it's a hoax after that and then just get rid of it and nobody can ever see it again? And the Smithsonian did that all over the United States, where they were finding these skeletons, because these skeletons were found everywhere, thousands of locations in burial mounds across the United States. They found these gigantic skeletons ranging in between 7 to 9 feet in height. Some of them were described as even having double rows of teeth, which, as we all know, humans do not have double rows of teeth. But of course,
we got top and bottom. Not everyone back.
you know
in
what I mean.
the
They're
old days had.
You got 2 rows on top, 2 on the bottom.
Oh, like a shark.
But yeah, something like that. Damn it, Mike.
Sorry.
But I mean, one of the most famous ones would be the Serpent Mound in Ohio. Everybody knows about that one. You know, the big windy serpent. The very famous mounds out there, because their artistry. Most Native American mounds were just typical. They were just a mound piled with rocks on top, things like that. But this one, they actually took the time to build huge, monumental structures of a serpent, snake, eating what looks like an egg. But they did find a skeleton there that was described as a 7-foot skeleton, but they took a picture of this thing and they didn't put any scale or anything next to it. They just said, it's 7 feet long. They took a picture of it. Well, if you notice in the picture, which you're all just going to have to look this up or take my word for it. But if you notice in the picture, the skeleton is missing its legs below the knees. So that makes you either come to one of two conclusions. One, it was 7 feet tall without its shins, which would make it even taller than 7 foot. Or they were just guessing that it had like 4 foot long legs or something below the knee because they couldn't find its legs. So it was just an average size skeleton. And they're like, but maybe its legs were super long. I don't know. That's what I get out of it. But once again, only a picture of this thing exists. And you can't tell any scale of it whatsoever just by looking at the picture. So kind of another one that's just easily debunked. Now, the Smithsonian did go around and collect a lot of these supposed skeletons that were found, took them back to their museum or whatever, and then nobody ever saw them again. So there's this huge conspiracy theory out there that there was a giant race of people that lived in the United States and North America long before we did and long before Native Americans did. And for some reason, the Smithsonian's trying to cover this up because it clashes with some sort of, a lot of people seem to think that it makes the Bible real. And if the Bible's real, then the government's going to fail or some shit. I don't understand where these people are getting their conspiracy theories from, but I think the Smithsonian was just finding a whole lot of hoaxes, and they were just like, this is getting old, people, all right? So they just kind of quietly shut it down. You had a lot of bored farmers and stuff at that time that were looking to make a quick buck, and between the late 1800s and the mid-1900s, there are a lot of supposed artifacts found in the United States that don't fit here. And most of them turned out to be hoaxes. Some just haven't been found to be hoaxes yet, but I can pretty much guarantee that they are. So it's like, yeah. So the same thing goes with all these skeletons. And the latest one that I could find was back in 1959 at Cresap Mound in northern West Virginia. They found a 7 foot 2 inch skeleton that they found. But here's the kicker with this one. As soon as the bones were exposed to air, they crumbled to dust. So they had no evidence whatsoever of this. That it was just, hey, take our word for it. We saw this skeleton, and then when it hit the air, poof, gone. Because, that's what skeletons do. So, yeah. But going back to the whole conspiracy theory thing, and then also kind of tying towards the end of the show now, because we've been running about an hour and 20 minutes, hour and 25 minutes, but whatever. There's another conspiracy theory out there that there were people of unimaginable size that used to roam the earth, which makes absolutely no sense. But they think that like mesas and like, for example, Devil's Tower out there in, where is it? Montana, I think, Wyoming, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
I don't know exactly where it's at, but they think that like Devil's Tower is a giant tree stump that was cut down by a giant human being back in the day. And, we got
with a giant chainsaw because it's flat on the top.
Yeah, it's just like perfectly flat. So where'd they get all the gas? To run that chainsaw, and it's 2 cycles, so you got to get oil for it as well. Yeah, I'm like, what the hell? But I mean, we've all heard stories of Paul Bunyan, the big gigantic guy that could cut down whole swaths of forest with one swing of his axe and his gigantic blue ox. But I don't really think that Devil's Tower was cut down by an axe, because you can tell the difference. But then, you got like Mount Roraima, Roraima or whatever down there in Venezuela, Brazil, Guyana area that they also think is just a gigantic stump, which proves to these conspiracy theorists that the Nephilim existed, therefore making the Bible fact. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, well, okay, no. For one, I mean, the Nephilim, I'm sure they were very mighty, but I'm sure they didn't know how to use a saw blade or a chainsaw at that time to be able to make such a clean, flat cut across these. So, yeah, I don't understand how geology works.
That I'm surprised you didn't mention this one with all the ones, but the Cardiff giant. So, way back, early 1900 something, they found a petrified man, a stone man.
Oh yeah, I do know this story. I thought it was just too ridiculous.
In Cardiff, England, they found this guy. He was 10 foot and 4.5 inches tall.
It's that half an inch makes a difference.
Yeah.
When it gets to that point.
He was eventually bought by P.T. Barnum himself, who personally guaranteed his authenticity.
Oh, yes, indeed. The most trustworthy man on the planet.
Turns out it was a hoax. It was a statue carved out of gypsum, a type of soft rock. And
very easily carvable.
The creator of this hoax crafted it to convince the world that the Bible was true.
Yeah, so these nuts have been around for a while.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes me, I kind of want to do an episode on this in the future about some of these wild, crazy, creationist conspiracy theories that they have out there, like with the Tartarians and the mud flood. That one has been fascinating me lately because they just believe that the entire world was covered in a flood of mud, not thousands of years ago, but back in like 1850.
What?
So that everything we know about history is a lie. And so I want to cover stuff like this in the future on this show because we are an odd podcast and we cover odd things.
That's certainly odd.
Yeah. But we'll talk about that at future dates. So, these crazy conspiracy people, I mean, they crack me the fuck up. And I want to talk about them because for one, it's an odd topic, and it's also funny the way these people think. But, we're not going to go off on them here because we're talking about giants. And to finish out the show, I'm going to bring up some examples of some actual real-life giants that actually did exist. And there's proof of them existing. And, of course, we all know the number one. If you've ever been to a Ripley's Believe It or Not museum, anywhere in the United States, I think they have the wax sculpture of this guy, like all of them. I don't know. But there's a Robert Wadlow, who is known as the world's tallest man at any point in time. And he stood at 8 foot 11.1 inches. And he is known as the tallest man to ever live. And he had a hypertrophy of his pituitary gland, which caused him to just continually grow his entire life very, very quickly. He passed away, unfortunately, at the young age of 22 due to complications from his gigantism, which makes sense. Most giants do. They don't live a very long life. So I got that to look forward to, which is great. But I'm not necessarily a giant, but I guess I could be. But whatever. Then there was Sultan. I'm probably going to mess up this guy's last name also. Kozan, I'm guessing, of Turkey, who currently holds the tallest man in the world record, which is soon to be surpassed by somebody else, I'm sure. But he stands at 8 foot 2.8 inches. He had his pituitary gland removed in 2010, and that's when he stopped growing. Ooh. If he would have left his pituitary gland in, who knows how tall. He could have surpassed probably Robert Wadlow, but I don't blame him for being like, look, I don't want to be taller. I'm 6'5", and it sucks. So I can only imagine being over 8 feet tall. I mean, I already have a hard enough time fitting into a car or going through like a door without hitting my head on something. Yeah, it's hard. And I'm only 6'5", so I can only imagine somebody that's 8 feet, almost 2 feet taller than I am. It's ridiculous. There was a Chinese woman named Yao Defen who had a tumor in her pituitary gland, and she passed away at 40 years old, and she was 7'8", and that's pretty tall for a woman. Anything really over 6 foot is considered tall for a woman. So that's pretty amazing. And then there was John Rogan, who was known as the tallest African American ever recorded. He was born in 1868 in Tennessee, and he was a normal height until he hit 13 years old. So he was considered normal. And then he just started growing like crazy, and he lived a good while. He passed away in 1905, and at his death, he was measured at 8 foot 8 inches. And until Robert Wadlow came along, John Rogan held the record as being the tallest man that ever lived. So, pretty impressive there. Now, to give some comparison to this, of how tall these people are, think of them being as over 8 feet tall. We give some comparison. The average basketball player in the NBA ranges from between about 6'6" to 6'8" inches tall. Now, we consider these guys as just being like, man, they're huge. Basketball players are huge, right? So, the tallest person ever in the NBA was Yasutaka Okayama, who was 7'8" inches. And he was drafted in 1981 to play for the Golden State Warriors. But he never actually ended up playing, but he was technically in the NBA. Now, to compare that, we all know Shaquille O'Neal, right? Mm-hmm. He's a measly 7'1" compared to these giants out there. So,
measly.
Measly. And me, I'm 6'5". I'm the baby of my family. My 2 older brothers are both 6'7". So,
Goddamn.
Yeah.
So you're not Jack the Giant Slayer, you're Jack the Giant.
I'm Jack the Little compared to the rest of my family. So, yeah, I'm the runt. And I'm technically could be considered a giant. Because looking back on all of that, everything that we've talked about, I mean, look at Goliath, 6'9". That's 4 inches taller than me. That's really not much, if you think about it. And he was seen as a giant. So it's just kind of weird. That's just how I'm going to end this one out. You know, just a little food for thought into how these giants are actually perceived. So yes, they could have possibly found skeletons of giants over 8 feet tall. We have actual living specimens of people that are over 8 feet tall. So it is possible that these giants did exist, but I think in mythology, it's just not what it's cracked up to be. And that's my stance on it. I don't think they existed. I think they were just regular people blown out of proportion over time.
Well, I got some closing thoughts. You mentioned quite a lot. I mean, I would agree with the connection in myth. I'm going to have a little different angle for my conclusion, though. You mentioned how, like, the gigantes of Greek myth, which, by the way, there's a whole epic in myth of the Gigantomachy, the war between the gods and the gigantes. And, you hit the nail on the head with the giants just being, like, really aggressive and strong. They really serve as the wild, untamed, maybe dangerous aspects of humans, while the gods who are fighting them serve as, like, the civilized aspects of humans. And then you got, like, almost the exact same motif, quite different, dressed up quite differently in the Epic of Gilgamesh. We didn't go into that, but just real briefly, he's a tyrant king. He runs around his city. Gilgamesh is also a giant. from Mesopotamian mythology. He runs around his city fighting his subjects in hand-to-hand combat and just beating the shit out of them. And
It's my kind of dude.
he doesn't get he doesn't get civilized until his friend, an actual wild man from the deserts, who's pretty much the same as him. He lives like a lion in the wilderness and just beats up animals. But this this wild man comes
That is
into
the
the
best
city.
description I've ever heard for anybody in my life. He just lives in the desert and beats up animals.
That's what he does, man. In Kidu, he's this wild man, and he comes into the city, and it's like Gilgamesh never would have stopped being a tyrant king until he met this wild dude who could match his strength, and then they both became quite civilized and became heroes of their city. But it's the same kind of thing. The might of civilization has to do with restraint. The might of wildness, it just has to do with raw animal-like aggression, which bears out in folklore as well. But we could go into that some other time because folklore is a lot of fun. But I mean, in conclusion, I think giants are just in general a mythological theme for the wild, uncivilized, or untamed, or even violent parts of human nature that are in myths overcome by humanity's better nature, the gods, the heroes, the more refined individuals. I personally had never given much thought to giants until you proposed this episode. So it's been a wild and wacky journey through stuff I've actually not really thought of much before now. So I thank you for that.
Good. That's why we're here. We're going to present these common things in a way that makes them, one, make more sense, or not make more sense. Like, I still never know if we actually accomplish anything by the time we get an episode done, but I don't necessarily believe in a whole lot of the paranormal, but a lot of the paranormal or strange things that occur in the world do fascinate me. And I like to put a scientific thought onto why, or a sociological thought onto why, or psychological, or anything, any sort of explanation that I can come up with that seems to make sense. And we're going to cover a wide range of topics on this show, like extremely wide. It's not just going to be stuck to ghosts or giants or the Bermuda Triangle, for example, what we're named after. I'm sure everybody's going to think that this show is just strictly about the Bermuda Triangle, but no, it has a lot to do with history and how we as human beings have perceived history and passed history along over the years with its outrageous claims and just strange things outright lurking in the shadows of human history. And we're gonna drag that shit out to the light, and we're gonna choke it to death right in front of you. So,
Yep.
yeah,
Choke it
that's
right
my
to death.
my whole premise of this. Yeah, we're gonna beat those animals to death.
Dude, this just occurred to me. So we talked in the Atlantis and worldwide flood myths episode about how the flood. At least I mentioned that flood myths may actually be a symbolic representation of like bottom up emotions or bottom up thinking in psychology. Dude, that would be why if giants are just aggressive traits and aggressive nature and stuff in like animal nature in humans, that'd be why they survived floods then.
Yeah.
So you have
That
a
would make
flood of
sense.
emotion, and you can still access that animal side of yourself, that aggressive side of yourself. Dude,
Every
holy shit.
culture that has a flood story has a giant story to go along with it. Even down to Central American cultures had a flood story consisting of giants that were tall enough to be above the floodwaters, and that's what they brought civilization back to the Central American cultures after they were wiped out.
Yeah.
They're the remainders. They're always seen as the remainders of a catastrophic event. So it would make sense that it's just the animal instincts that are left over from when civilization falls. You have people that are just animalistic in nature that come back. Yeah, they're going to be seen as giants of stature, of might, of everything like that. So, yeah, it all ties together. Every single one of our episodes so far has tied together in some way, shape, or form. And I honestly, I'm kind of loving that, because it really does go to show that we as human beings all tie together. And from the dawn of time, when we first started putting our collective minds together, we've always been connected. So there is always going to be a logical explanation for what's going on. We just like to embellish shit over the years and make it sound so much more than what it actually is. And, you know, maybe, who knows, maybe 1,000 years down the road, 2,000 years down the road, somebody's going to pick up this podcast somehow. And it's going to be, that's going to be the Iliad of our day. Who knows? I don't know.
Wow, that's giving us a lot of credit.
It's kind of high hopes, I know. But
That's a big burden to bear.
But maybe within the next year or two, some syndication will pick us up, and that'd be nice.
Hey, yeah.
But I'm not, just throwing that out there.
We're not selling out, though.
No, hell no. I'll never sell out. My cigarette will go out, though. But yeah, I think we ought to end this one. It's been great. I actually, I was really looking forward to this topic, but I didn't think it was going to be as good and as deep as we made it. And yeah, I think we really hit the nail on the head with what we've concluded. So, you as the listener, you can take this and use it however you may. Well, not the actual podcast. You don't have the rights to that, so don't use that however you may. But anyway, you can use the information that we presented to come up with your own ideas about it. That's the great thing about us being humans. We're critical thinkers. We're imaginative. We can come up with shit. So, as evidenced as in our history, people have been making up shit for years. So, yeah, it's just, use it how you will. Take this information that we've given you and, think about it. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
So, appreciate you for being on, Mike, as usual. I wouldn't have anybody else. Because, man, you really challenged me on these topics, and I hope I challenge you as well. And it leads us to having some very, very good discussions on this. So we're going to have to come up with something just as good on the next episode, and I'm sure we will.
Yep.
But thanks, everybody, for listening. Don't really know how to close it out, so
thank you for coming along on this adventure as we fight giants, slay giants, maybe befriend a few giants, and conclude what we may about the topic of giants in myth.
Yeah, I'm a
Thanks
giant.
for joining
I'm friendly. You can all befriend me, but in the meantime, we're gonna get on out of here. So, good day, good night, good morning, whatever. We'll see y'all later.
Bye.
Feeling like a giant, walking over walls. I could crush a mountain, 100 feet tall.